Hello, everyone, and welcome to NAVA 58, the Preble lecture. This year, we're fortunate enough to have a panel discussion on the new Minnesota state flag, the story of the State Emblems Redesign Commission. My name is Dave Berger, and I'll be your moderator for this session. And as I said earlier, we might have a little bit of a change in the lineup, but thank goodness the Secretary of State, Steve Simon, and Director Kent Whitworth are willing and able to take the place of Aaron. So I'd like to also, since I've mentioned the names a couple times, this is a jointly sponsored event by, of course, the Minnesota Historical Society and the North American Vexillological Association. To get started today, though, we're going to get a welcome from Director and CEO of the Minnesota Historical Society, Kent Whitworth.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's an honor to have all of you here, and we are excited to relive what turned out to be a very meaningful experience for all of us. And the Minnesota Historical Society was honored when the legislation passed to provide administrative support for this effort. And I wanted to take this moment publicly to thank several of my colleagues. There are at least 6 or 8 MNHS colleagues that I think did a magnificent job setting this commission up for success. And they were creating tools and responding to challenges in real time and doing that in addition to a full-time job. So David Kelleher, our Vice President for Public Policy and Governmental Relations, was one of the keys there. I was looking around the room to see if any of our other colleagues are here, but I will thank David Kelleher on behalf of our colleagues that made CERC an administrative success. And speaking personally, I was privileged to be on the commission, and that was a remarkable experience and a great collection of folks. And Chair Fitch, I've just got to say publicly again how much we appreciated your leadership. And your Vice Chair, Anita Gall, what a great team. And thank you for what you did for our state and for that commission. So as I said, we are delighted to partner with NAVA. I hope you get a chance to experience the Minnesota History Center. Hopefully you already have. But we are proud to be a part of this afternoon's lecture and proud to be a partner with the state of Minnesota to impact the lives of Minnesotans today and in the future. So welcome and thank you.
Now, originally I was going to talk about how the program is designed today and whatnot, and then turn it over to the Secretary of State, Steve Simon, for introductory comments, and then he was going to fly to another event. But now he's on the panel. I don't have to do that. So now I can just segue right into it. Why don't we go, Tony, make sure that all the mics are live, right? And Secretary of State, Steve Simon, do you want to do your introductory comments anyways?
Can you hear me okay? Mic on?
Yeah. Tony?
It is on. Okay, great.
Here we go.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and being part of this event today and helping us look back, deconstruct, describe, and really celebrate what happened with the Emblems Commission. I, too, was a member of that commission, one of the 13, along with the 2 gentlemen sitting to the side of me and with Kent Whitworth. Let me just say quickly, and then we'll get to the panel. I never thought today would come. I really didn't. Redesigning the state flag and state seal was something that had been talked about for a long time, not just years, but decades. People had determined a long time ago that the state seal and the state flag, which are synonymous because, as many of you know or have come to understand, they were one and the same. Our old state flag, the traditional historic state flag, it still has a certain status, was basically like one of many states' approach, which is a seal on a blue bed sheet, right? That's what it was. So they're one and the same. And people had long ago concluded, many people had concluded, that the images on that seal, and therefore on the flag, were, let's just say, to be diplomatic, problematic. They weren't a modern reflection of who we were as a state. If they ever were a reflection, they certainly weren't now, and there were a lot of things that were really problematic about that. But people talk a lot about tasks they should get to, chores they wish they had time for. All of us in our lives had said, yeah, I really should repaint that room someday. And it never happens, right? Or I really should do that. And that was sort of the attitude for a long time when it came to the flag and seal. But then along came Representative Frieberg and his colleague in the Senate, Senator Kunesh. And they weren't content to do that. And I just want to say, because knowing Representative Frieberg, he's going to be modest about it, but I don't have to be on his behalf. He did what people for 20 years or more had been talking about doing. And he did it. He and Senator Kunesh did it, and they pushed it. You know, in the Minnesota legislature, and probably every legislature, people throw in bills for all sorts of reasons. And you can toss in a bill, but there's a difference between tossing in a bill that gets introduced and really putting your effort behind it and your labor behind it and your reputation behind it. And I have so much respect and admiration. And I think 100 years from now, people will look back and thank Representative Frieberg, Senator Kunesh for what they did, which is to really put their reputations behind it and really put effort and energy into this process, which, as we'll discuss, produced something that is really special and enduring. As it was clear that Representative Frieberg and Senator Kunesh were serious about this, I tried to do my own homework before I ever knew I'd be on the commission. One of the duties of the Minnesota Secretary of State's office, a little known one, a relatively obscure one, is that we in Minnesota are the keeper of the state seal. Keeper of the state seal, which means we keep official copies of it and we literally seal documents, affix the seal to certain documents. It's sort of a ceremonial post, but it is part of the portfolio of the office. And so after it was clear that these two legislators were really serious about doing this and doing it in a serious way, by the way, in a thorough way, in a thoughtful way, I did my homework. I do a lot of traveling around the state of Minnesota. It's the best part of my job. I regularly visit all 87 counties. And I decided to fold into my regular county visits with the chief executives of all 11 federally recognized Native American Indian tribes. These are sovereign governments, just like the state of Minnesota. And so over the course of a year or so, I did that. I touched base with all 11 of them. And without naming particular tribal governments or particular tribal leaders, I can tell you there was some diversity of opinion. Like with any community, no one part of it speaks for all of it. And the same was true with the Minnesota flag and seal. There was one tribal leader, and I won't name names, who in my meeting with him face to face was literally in tears, not metaphorically, literally in tears, talking about the flag and seal, talking about how deeply hurtful and painful those images were, about how going back 3 governors, he had told them that every time they see a governor holding a press conference with that seal on the podium, it pained him and pained his community. That was one view. On the other end of the spectrum, I would say, was another tribal leader from another tribe, and I won't name either of them, who said, I wouldn't say the opposite, but he said, you know what? I've never really looked at it. I mean, I walk by it 100 times. I wouldn't say it's hurtful to me, but I would say it's not a modern depiction. It doesn't represent who we are. It's not a, contemporary depiction or representation of who we are as a state. But all of them agreed that it needed modernizing. It needed refreshing. Whether it was the first tribal chair that I mentioned or the second, they all agreed, this needs to be redesigned and redone. And then there's the other issue, which I know NAVA is very involved with, generally speaking, which is even leaving on the shelf for a minute, just for a minute, the cultural issue of what is or isn't depicted on it. Just get that out of your mind for a minute. As a flag, it was a bad flag, right? Just a bad flag. Even if you loved every last image and detail on there, it just didn't work as a flag. And we can talk about seals in a minute, but we're here to talk about flags. And so as a flag, and you all taught us a great lesson during this commission process about what makes a good flag, generically speaking, that it ought to be less is more, that it ought to be limited in terms of color, depiction, that ideally a child should be able to draw it from memory. You should be able to see it and identify it from a long way away, and so forth. And it should unite and not divide. All that is to say, and let's get into the panel, after a lot of work by a lot of people, starting with and very much including these two legislators, including Representative Frieberg, we now have what I think is an outstanding, excellent flag that represents us, that is the product of some real thoughtful process. And I would be remiss if I didn't also add on what others have said. We couldn't have had a better chair. Louise Fitch was absolutely outstanding. It's one of those examples that you see in life once in a while where the intersection of just the right person for just the right moment, by temperament, by experience, by the way he ran meetings, the respect that he engendered, and that came back to him in so many ways. He was just the perfect person to head up and guide us through this process. So with that, I just want to say this is a special moment that I thought would never come. I'd heard about these debates and these arguments over, well, should we one day kind of sort of maybe talk about the flag and seal? But it took a lot of people, including these two gentlemen, to really make it happen. And it happened in a way that I think was thoughtful and thorough. And in the end, we got an emblem that's enduring and that we can be really, really proud of.
Before we actually jump in today, so we're going to do a few changes already. We're going to do the panel discussion. But before we actually get to it, I'm going to give a little bio for Mike and for Luis, just for those of you in the audience who don't know much about them. And so we'll start with Luis. He's an internationally acclaimed strategic designer, artist, mentor, and visionary entrepreneur, renowned for his transformative contributions. He is the creator and director of Uno Branding, an innovative cross-cultural design agency in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Throughout his career, Luis has spearheaded award-winning branding initiatives for esteemed entities such as the Smithsonian Latino Center, the PepsiCo, General Mills, Frito-Lay, Target Corp, Best Buy, Nike, Macy's, Kimberly-Clark, and MTV Latino. I bet you there is more on that list, but you can cut it short. His creative prowess resonates with audiences across diverse cultures and geographies. Through captivating lectures, he intricately weaves the threads of art, design, and commerce, inspiring minds to explore the dynamic intersection of these domains. That's a great bio, by the way. Mike, good luck. Mike Frieberg is a Minnesota State Representative, serving his sixth term, representing the cities of Crystal, Golden Valley, Plymouth, and Robbinsdale. During the 2023-2024 session, he served as chair of the Elections, Finance, and Policy Committee. He previously chaired the Preventative Health Policy Division and the Government Operations Committee. Mike has authored many pieces of legislation, including the legislation to change the Minnesota state flag. When he is not serving as state representative, he works as an attorney for a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving public health. He lives in Golden Valley with his wife and two children. I think a round of applause for both those bios. Fantastic. And so now we're going to give them each a chance. Probably not the Secretary of State because he had his turn, but for Luis and for Mike, just any opening comments you want to make about anything about the whole process, just to get us kind of framing the discussion. Go for it. Either one of you can go.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. I just have some I have some notes. There were some things I wanted to make sure I mentioned. So if you see me glancing down, that's what's going on. So there have been numerous bills over the last couple decades to address the issue of the flag. Secretary Simon mentioned them. I'm just kind of the latest person and the one who was fortunate enough to do it at the time that there was a critical mass of legislators to get it to pass. Since I've been in the legislature, there was a bill, the only bill I know on the topic was one that would have created an advisory committee just to recommend a new flag design to the legislature, but it didn't actually mandate that a new flag design be created. So I sort of came at it. I worked with the legislator who had worked on that bill, Representative Peter Fisher. He was very closely involved in this process as well. But I kind of wanted a bill that didn't just make a recommendation. It actually required that the flag be changed. And I wanted it to apply to the seal as well. I thought those were interrelated issues, just with the seal being on the flag and the imagery being problematic. Secretary Simon did a good job of covering kind of the problems with the flag. It's both the problematic imagery depicting the indigenous person on the horse there. Actually, I wanted to say a little bit more about that too. I recently became a member of NAVA, and I got this issue of Vexillum. And they did a great job. I read the article. It really does a good job of describing the process kind of from beginning to end. But one of the things in there that it mentions is there was a poem written by the wife of the designer of the state seal. And they worked very closely together on it. So she, when she writes about it, she's very much depicting his goals in designing the state seal. And it's very clearly, I got accused as part of this process of being woke, and this is the new woke flag, whatever that means. But it's not hypothetical. There was a definite purpose in the design of the state seal and the depiction of the indigenous person on the horse in there. And it was meant to depict them leaving Minnesota, frankly. We still have, as Secretary Simon mentioned, we still have 11 thriving tribes in Minnesota. And they're not going anywhere. So, the poem that Mary Eastman wrote to describe what was going on in the seal, this is just the portion of the poem quoted in this article. It says, give way, young warrior, the rocky bluff and prairie land. The white man claims them now. The symbols of his course are here, the rifle, axe, and plow. So, I mean, it's pretty clear that the intent in designing that was one of manifest destiny of white settlers completely displacing indigenous people. And I didn't think that was something we should celebrate on either our flag or our seal. So the bill I drafted set up a commission of 13 people. It used, they were meant to represent people from all over the state. So there were, we have ethnic councils in Minnesota, the Minnesota Council of Latino Affairs, which Chair Fitch was the representative of, a council on Minnesotans of African heritage, the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, but then also arts and tourism organizations like the Historical Society, the Arts Board, the Humanities Center, the Tourism Board for Minnesota. So there were members of all these groups in there. And then there were also 4 legislators who were non-voting members of the commission. Some advice I got from House research attorneys was that if you have a legislator actually voting on the board, then there's a potential separation of powers issue, because you'd have somebody from the legislative branch essentially making a executive branch type decision, and it would be potentially subject to a legal challenge. But I do think also having legislators serving as non-voting members did help to depoliticize the process somewhat. I wouldn't say it was completely depoliticized as at all, because it got very political at times. And I initially didn't think I would want to serve on the State Emblems Redesign Commission. I'm colorblind. I have red-green color blindness. I'm the last person who should be designing anything that has anything to do with color. But the more I thought about it as the process kind of went along, I thought, I really care about this process and this issue. I'd be a non-voting member anyway, so I put my name in, and I got appointed to the commission. So I was glad to be a part of that. The timeline the bill set out was very aggressive. As we kind of got started, I started getting worried, like maybe this was too aggressive, because we had about 5 months to come up with to solicit input from 5 million Minnesotans and come up with a new design and vote on it and approve it for both the seal and the flag. But and it's appropriate too. I should mention that this is being held in conjunction with the Historical Society at the History Center. They did amazing work. I mean, this was setting up something from scratch, setting up a web form that could accept 2,000 submissions for flags, could accept 200,000 comments from Minnesotans. I mean, you saw the numbers out there, 21,000 comments. So we didn't have that much to read, fortunately, but it was still a lot. They were able to get it all done. And I have to say too, this was not, it was a budget year that when we passed it, this was not probably the top budget item in legislative leadership's mind. So I think we had something like a $34,000 appropriation for this whole process, which in terms of state government is nothing. So there was very little money, very little resources, but they really put everything into it. And we wouldn't be where we are without the Minnesota Historical Society. They did amazing work. And kind of in hindsight, I'm glad the process was short and only 5 months long. The scrutiny of the process was intense. And it was, I've carried hundreds of bills over my 12 years in the legislature. This was unlike anything I had done. I just did not realize how many opinions people had about flags. And I think Minnesotans just would have been exhausted by it if it had gone on for longer than that. I mean, I've heard of states that would take 2 years to do it. And I can't even imagine. I don't think I would be alive still at the end of a 2-year long process like this. So, we had a very public facing process. All our meetings were televised. We received lots of great submissions from Minnesotans and people from outside of Minnesota for that matter. And I'm guessing you saw some of the ridiculous submissions, like the person who submitted the picture of their dog or the loon with lasers coming out of its eyes, the big mosquito. I mean, and when I first saw those, I was kind of afraid like, oh, this whole process is just going to appear to be a joke to people. But I actually think those sorts of things kind of helped generate interest among Minnesotans and actually helped legitimize the process and made people realize like, oh, this is really happening. Maybe I should submit a comment or something. So I think it generated even greater involvement. So it was an exciting process to be a part of. I'm really happy with the final result and glad to hear from the rest of the panel and take questions.
Thanks. Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Mike. Luis?
I don't have too much to say other than the first encounter was we have a client in Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian Latino Center, and the director, we were working rebranding the museum. And the first thing when I met him, he says, I don't believe in branding or marketing, so I don't know what you're doing here. And I said, well, just take it easy. We'll take you through all this stuff. And 3 years later, so 2 years ago, he was invited to talk about art and Latino culture in the United States at the University of Minnesota. And I took my design team and we were there in the audience. And the first slide that he started with was the flag. And he started pointing at, I can't believe you guys have this. And you need to start changing this. And he started and it was the first time I'd been living here for 28 years. Never pay attention to the flag, never saw it in the context that he saw it. And he was pointing at me. You need to change it. And I go, now you believe in branding. So 2 years later, then, yeah, this happened. So that's how my first encounter with the flag.
I'd like to do a follow-up with you, Luis, if you don't mind. When you got the call that you were selected for the commission, how'd you feel about that?
Well, first, I saw it in social media. The Minnesota Latino Affairs said there's an opening. You have to be Latinos to represent. And I said, well, I want to design the flag. I thought it was more about me designing the flag. So I jumped into it. And then I saw all the other Latino leaders who wanted to participate. I said, I'm not going to, be part of it. All of them were like high-end politicians and great community leaders for the Latino community. Out of that, they chose me. And so I went there and first week, I think it was the first meeting, we all voted and I became the commissioner. And I didn't know what I was doing that day. I didn't know what it meant to be the commissioner. And I'm glad that happened because I didn't have a sense of any political or anything. I came as a designer, as a brand person, and I know what a good design is and bad design is. I didn't know anything about flag, but I'm a fast learner. And thanks to the people from NAVA and everybody who helped us, we know how to ask the right questions. But the most important piece of the whole process, for me at least, was right away to establish a creative brief. That's something that we do with our clients. And I highly recommend everyone, if in any type of project, but more if you're going to design a flag and there's a community, to establish a creative brief. And you can download still, I believe, the creative brief, and you can add more to it if as needed. But that established a bunch of things that it took us 3 weeks, I think, for all of us to edit it and whatnot, and then to be happy.
Did you want to point out anything?
Yeah, I mean, that became the blueprint for us. And basically, I'm not sure if it's, So who's the user? We do that in any assignment. The project overview, the present Minnesota State and general description. So we all agree on the same things. And then we wanted to make sure about the simplicity and recognizability. Then talk about distinctive colors, enduring appeal, symbolism, symmetry. What was mandatory? That was very important too. And then we put ourselves on design parameters. That really helped us a lot. The flag's dimension, the simple iconography, the typical displays that we were not familiar with. And then we have some deliverables, the flag design, the design rationale. And then we had a timeline. And that was another document too with the timeline. It was very specific. Every week we had deliverables and what we were going to do. So we really follow the timeline. And then we had a budget. We had $35,000. And I like saying this because a lot of our clients that we work with, they're nonprofit or community projects. And they come to us and say, well, you look like you're very expensive. And I say, well, yeah, if we're working with Target, we're very expensive. But if it's a small community project, we can work, with small budgets. So when when I heard that Utah spent a year and $250,000 and we spent 3 months and $35,000, it was like, this is us. This is Uno. This is the type of projects that we work with. And so for me, it was very realistic. The budget, the timing, and everything. And then we had our evaluation criteria and then some additional notes. But it's super important to start with a creative brief so you have certain limitations. And everybody signs off and they're in agreement with this. Because months happen and people start changing their minds on things, you can always go back to what I call the blueprint and say, okay, this is it. This is what we all established.
I'd like to go back to Steve Simon, Secretary of State, for a minute. Mike mentioned that there were over 21,000 public comments about the seal and the flag. And I'm just wondering, I'm going to throw it out to all of you, but I'd like to start with you, Steve. How did you assimilate 21,000 comments?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's challenging because, as you heard, it's a really condensed time that we had to do all of this from beginning to end. But I can't speak for every member of the commission, but I really took time to read. I mean, you have to sort of skim at that volume. It's not a detailed read, but I was scrolling and looking at the comments, and you could see patterns emerge. And there were some positive, there were some highly negative, and you have to sort of put these things in perspective. Let me just give you one anecdote, and I'd be interested to hear what these two say about it. One of the most valuable days that we had for me of the commission meeting was when, and I think this was Luis's idea, I don't know, we were shown some newsreel footage from a similar project in Canada in the mid-'60s where they changed their flag. And we were shown newsreel footage. And it got so heated in Canada in like 1966 when they were redesigning their national flag that there were members of parliament who were threatening to take the government down. People felt so strongly, you're hijacking our history, you're doing away with our traditions and our images, and whatever the words then for woke and PC were, they lobbed those too. But I bet if you took a survey today of Canadians, 90 or 95% would say they love their flag. You're picturing it right now as I'm talking about this. It's instantly recognizable on packages, on flagpoles, everything. That iconic 11-pointed maple leaf, red and white, clean, crisp, representative. I bet it's wildly popular in Canada. I don't know that, but I would imagine it is. And to think that at one time in the mid-'60s, people were fighting about this and having all sorts of political culture wars about it. That's why and this sort of connects with these comments, to sort of put it in perspective, step back. It's okay to be critical, of course. And the comments really helped in shaping the outcome. But there were some on there that were pretty sort of apocalyptic. And I think in time, not too much time even, people are going to look back on this date and say, wow, how could that ever be controversial?
Mike,
you knew what I mean.
My strategy for reviewing the comments was pretty similar to Secretary Simon's. One thing I'd mention is I do feel like this process, just in terms of public input, I do feel like this process kind of struck the right balance. There were calls for the ultimate flag that the commission chose to go back to the legislature. There were calls for it to go back to a vote of Minnesotans. But I think what we did in the end, just having a diverse group of 13 Minnesotans plus 4 non-voting members, make kind of shape the process and the ultimate result, I think worked well. I mean, I think the legislature is just, speaking as a legislator, frankly, I think it would be a terrible place to make this decision. We have 201 legislators between the House and the Senate in Minnesota. And I just can't even imagine what a debate there where, legislators debating over, well, the stripe should be here. I think we should have this color be that, like on the House floor or the Senate floor, would have been painful. And then in Minnesota, we don't have a process for policy questions to go to a vote of Minnesotans either. Like the only time things go to a vote in Minnesota is when they go into the state constitution, essentially. So this wasn't really the appropriate vehicle for that. So I feel like the process, as other states consider how to do this and how to get public input, I feel like the process we did, where we take public submissions, we take public comments, and then a kind of representative commission ultimately weighs that all, and their decision, I think, was a really good way to go and worked very well for us.
Luisa, how did you assimilate 21,000 odd comments? They weren't all odd, but
nobody has ever asked me this. And so the reality was that we didn't have too much time. Plus, I was doing other things. And every week I had to prepare the presentations, like the video, the Canadians. And I had to predict what was going to happen in the meetings. So I had all the tools ready, plus PowerPoint presentations, plus reading all this. So there's this little thing called ChatGPT and interns. And so one of my interns copied everything. We put it in ChatGPT in 35 seconds. It separated all the BS, all the good stuff, all the local. I mean, it did a beautiful job. And I read everything and it synthesized everything, very simple. And everything that it was just not going to help me, I just ignored it. And everything that it was good information for me to bring back, then I synthesized that, and that's what I use. So it was very simple, and you can even ask more questions like, give me percentages, how many people said this, how many people want lasers coming out of an eye. You can go crazy asking ChatGPT. So that's how I resolved that problem.
I think that was a very clever thing to do. I taught on the collegiate level for 30 years, and my students use a lot of electronic aids when they write papers. Very exciting. We're going to turn it over to the audience now for quite a long time. We're hoping the bulk of the rest of the presentation today will be you asking these wonderful people questions. And you can see I've got a couple greeters and ushers sliding down the aisles right now. We got Christopher and Allie on this side, and Dave and Burdette on this side. They have microphones. They're not going to give you the microphone, but they're going to put it in front of you and you can ask a question or two. And we're going to try to limit it to 1 or 2 questions so we can move to the next person so everyone gets a chance, right, to ask these people questions about the whole State Emblems Redesign Commission process. So does anyone have a question ready to go? Oh, Steve has something. Oh, Steve's got to go. Can we all give him a hand? Thank you, Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon, for your participation. And his backup player is going to be Kent Whitworth of the Minnesota Historical Society. All right. Now, questions from the audience. I think I saw somebody over here. And Chris, you got it? Okay, here we go.
So one of your goals on one of your slides said you wanted to have a flag that would resonate with Minnesotans. So I understand there's significant pushback on this flag. I'd like to hear how you address the way Minnesotans are responding to the flag. I've also heard anecdotally that while all your government agencies are flying it, that many municipalities just don't want to fly it or not flying it, and that a lot of people aren't accepting it. Could you address these topics?
Why don't we narrow that down? Which one do you want to address? There was multiple ones there. Which one?
I think they're all the same topic, but all right, address the negativity then.
From the public.
Yeah, is the pushback significant against the flag?
Okay. Anybody? Oh, Mike wants to start.
Yeah. As we went through this process, it kind of became more and more clear to me that anything we did was going to be objected to by 30 to 40% of the population. I mean, it's visual. It's a visual art. There's just inherent subjectivity in it. So, I mean, I do think the example from Canada is illustrative, and I certainly can't promise anything, but I do feel like as people get more and more used to the new flag design, some of those negative feelings will go away. That's certainly my hope. People were, I just, at a certain point, I got really sick of hearing people would come up to me. They're like, during this process, like, the flag needs to be this. And they were all completely certain of their position about what the flag needed to look like. And it was all completely at odds with each other. So the more I kind of took that in, the more I realized, like, whatever we do is going to upset a certain number of people. And then once it got politicized and, accusations of it being woke started being thrown out there, I'm like, yeah, that's probably going to happen even more so. I mean, unfortunately, we live in really polarized times right now. Almost anything can get turned into a partisan bludgeon. But my hope is that as more and more people kind of get used to it, they'll come to, maybe not love it, but at least accept it and recognize it as the symbol of Minnesota.
Kent, did you have any comments on that? Oh, hang on. Let's let him have time to put his mic on.
I'll just hold it like this
Oh, okay.
so people can hear me. First thing that came to mind at the Minnesota Historical Society, we're used to playing a long game for obvious reasons, being in history. But I agree with the representative that Canada is a great case study for us. And I think even personally, people had lots to recommend to me as a voting member of the commission. But even in the 6 months during this process, I'd like to think that we all began the educational process with Minnesotans so that they understood why we were going in some of the directions we were. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank NAVA and Ted Kaye in particular. I think his serving as a resource early in the process for the commission was huge. And so it's a journey. We didn't go into this thinking that there would be unanimity across the state, but I'm with the representative. I think in a few years, a majority of Minnesotans are really going to embrace this. And a lot of that is because of the guidance and the wisdom of what NAVA shared with us. They were invaluable resources.
Luis, did you have any comments on this?
I'm not a politician, so this is becoming more political now. And my only 2 cents is the nation is divided. The state is divided. And even my neighborhood is divided, and my family is divided. So, 50% will love it, and the other 50%, they hate it. Even if they love it, they can't say they like it. And so, that's because it's a political thing, right? But I can tell you something from a graphic design. I have a fellow, I'm a fellow at the American Institute of Graphic Arts. Here in Minnesota, we're the 3rd largest in the United States, so it's huge. And even between my design fellows, they were telling me, why are you doing this for free? It looks like clip art. Those who don't know what clip art is, it's just free graphics that you can download from anyone. So I was being criticized left and right from everyone, even from people, students and other design agencies and whatnot, for different levels, not just politically, but visually and because I was getting not paid and all this stuff, right? So, but the only way I can judge it is it's the amount of flags that I see when I go from my neighborhood and how many there used to be. And in my block, there was only one person who always had a flag of Minnesota. Now all of them have it. The only person who does not have one, it's me. And I know it's strange. The reason I didn't put it out, I was the first one probably as soon as we knew the flag, I ordered one. And I think I was the first one to order one. And because they didn't know how it worked, I received it. And I didn't want to put it up until it was the day that you can, put it up. So I went and put it up and my son goes, isn't it backwards? I go, what's backwards? That's the way it goes. He was looking at it from the other side and they printed it wrong. And so I was so embarrassed. I said, I can't do that. and I haven't bought one. I just bought one today at the store out here.
Thank you.
Yes. I spent $300 on all kinds of stuff.
Luis, Kit took me into his confidence, which I'm going to violate. And you spent $300 out there?
No. I for the flag itself, it's $80.
Oh, okay.
I bought a bunch of other things for the office. Yeah.
So we got a lot of stuff.
Yeah, the merch for the flag is
a good customer. Got one right here.
Take a look.
Was there another question on this side? I thought I saw somebody over there. Okay, here we go.
For Mike Frieberg, how were you able to convince your legislative colleagues to forego the opportunity of having final say on the design?
It wasn't easy. There was an amendment on the House floor to do that. Honestly, so for those of you who aren't from Minnesota, again, unfortunately, things tend to get partisan, but in previous years, we had divided government. So most recently, prior to the 2022 election, the state Senate was run by the Republicans. Our governor, as you may know, is a Democrat. He's received some national attention recently. And the House where I am was run by the Democrats. But then in the 2022 election, the Senate chamber flipped to the Democrats. So there was a Democratic trifecta. So that certainly helped. I think, there's certainly members who disagree, but I think the general consensus, at least among the Democrats, was, do we really want to do this? Do we want this debate to come to the floor? Like, if we consider the ultimate design, there'd be amendments. There'd be amendments to put loons in there. There'd be amendments to put stripes and to change the colors. And do we really want to spend, we have a part-time legislature in Minnesota. We only meet from January through May. The number of days we can meet as a legislature is limited by the state constitution. So the thought, I think at least there were enough members to constitute a majority for the vote that, we have a high opinion of ourselves, I suppose, as a legislature in general. But I think sometimes realism does creep in, and it's like, do we really want to hear everyone debating this type of stuff? And so it didn't end up in the final bill, and I think that helped the process ultimately.
Did I see a question on this side? We're going to move it around a little bit. Nobody over there? Somebody down here. Here we go. Thanks. Here we go.
I have two questions. One quick one for Mr. Whitworth. How are the sales going of the flag merchandise in your shop?
Okay, hold on. We'll get that answer.
I can tell you anecdotally that they're going quite well. And I'll just acknowledge that we were, kind of in an awkward spot, that we were legislatively tasked with the responsibility to provide administrative support for this process, but we were trying to be non-partisan, and yet we had one voting seat on the commission. So, we are used to kind of navigating tough circumstances, but we were careful not to champion the flag. And even from a retail standpoint, we certainly wanted to wait until it was official and but once it did become the state seal and flag, we and our role felt like it was very appropriate. So we've enjoyed leaning into developing merchandise, but we certainly tried to make sure we didn't appear like as a premature champion of a particular design. So, but early on, we've only had the merchandise for a couple of months, but so far so good.
People I think Mike wants to follow up on that.
Sell the old flag in the shop upstairs?
I don't believe we sell the old flag anymore, but we do have the retired flag in our collection. I remember the morning that the new flag went up and had the honor to receive with a couple of our curators the retired flag, and that's significant. It is, I think Secretary Simon says, it has standing and it's part of our history, and so we do have that in the collection, and we'll take care of it in perpetuity.
And I want to make a plug for tomorrow's tour of the state capitol, where a number of your flags are on display, and I think we're doing a flag parade around 1:30 up to the Capitol, and you should all be there. And at 1:50, we'll take the tour. But there was a part two to the question too.
To expand, you talked about the negativity on the part of some of the public and so on. What about amongst the members of the commission? Have some of them now, looking back, decided maybe they've made a mistake?
So a question about negativity from the commission itself. Anybody want to take that?
From my end, I don't mistakes. No, but definitely, when the governor was running, or it's running for vice presidency, I got 30 calls and emails from all of them from Fox News around the nation to answer to the question of why the flag looked like the Somali flag. So let's talk about it. Let's get that over. Just get it out of the way now. And they wanted to. I mean, it all hit that day, exactly the same day. And I didn't have the time, and I didn't want it to go there. So it's like, yeah.
Anyone else? Oh, Mike.
Well, there was a minority report filed. So I know that the two non-voting members who were Republican legislators signed on to that. I think they felt the final design should go towards to a vote of the people of Minnesota. I think maybe Aaron signed on to that. Yeah. So, and he had some specific design. I think I forget exactly what his issue was, but I mean, there wasn't total. And I think there was one other member who voted no on the flag design, but didn't sign on to the minority report. So, I mean, there was certainly not total unanimity among commission members also, but I think most were respectful as a part of the process.
Kent, do you want to say anything on that? Or
I guess the comment I would make is those who did not support the final design, in my view, had many, many opportunities to express their opinion. I thought Louise did an excellent job of creating an environment where non-supportive perspectives could be heard. So I thank you for that.
Speaking of design elements, there's a member of the audience that didn't leave early that submitted a question to me. I think it's a really good question to all three of you. Is there any design element you wish would have made it into the flag that was in one of the other submissions? It doesn't have to be one of the finalists, but any of the other submissions. Is there any element that you caught your eye and you said, gosh, I really like that element? Because I talked to a lot of people and they have said that. They said, well, I had this favorite or this element I wanted to see. And did you have some element that didn't make it to the final that you might have wanted to see in the final?
For me, it was the other way. The original flag by the original designer had 3 stripes.
Andrew Prekker.
Yes, and I was really concerned that was going to be it. That was going to be the flag, and I thought it was still too busy.
Oh, so you agreed with taking that away?
Yes, okay. Not only me, all of us, other than one person, I think. Right? Yeah, one person. Yeah, basically. And so it was the other way. I was concerned more to where we're heading in the semifinals than the final one.
And you guys?
Well, I don't know that I don't know that I personally had that. I wasn't a voting member again, so I didn't actually vote on whether or not to take out the stripes or anything. I probably would have gone along with the commission and voted to do so. But that is one thing that we did hear from some people, like there should be green. One of the stripes was green, and we heard from people that there's, Minnesota has these rich, pine forests and prairie lands and stuff, and so we should have those represented on the flag. And but ultimately, I think that the decision of the commission was, well, we're also the land of 10,000 lakes. Pretty much every state has trees and grass and stuff, and we wouldn't necessarily be highlighting how unique we are as Minnesotan if we include that. So let's go all in on the blue, I think was kind of the decision of the commission, and I think that makes sense. I support that decision. Before
I get to Kent's comment, because he's rustling in his seat, he has a comment. I just want to make sure everyone knows my blue. I got my blue on the flag, blue everywhere. Go ahead, Kent.
I will say that as we were reviewing those 2,000 plus submissions, there were a couple of designs that I was drawn to, and I marveled at the ability of graphic designers to take very simple forms and for me anyway, take me to a place, whether it was North Shore or another kind of lake setting. And so those would maybe be my personal favorites. But then I come back to the principles that we owe to NAVA. And when you realize that you understood the task at hand, that yes, those were compelling, but they did not meet the criteria. And the other, one of those criteria is, how does it work, from a distance? It totally disappeared. So I think from a design standpoint, we did really, really well. I think it was the leadership of our chair and vice chair and the incredible tools that you resourced us with.
Yeah, I just want to make mention of Ted Kaye again. I think you mentioned his name earlier, but let's just take a moment to recognize Ted for all his work for NAVA. Thank you, Ted. And he has a question, so can we get the mic? Oh, we got a question up there, and then we'll go to Ted after you. Oh. Yes, is he here? Andrew, stand up, Andrew. Stand up. There's the original designer right there. And now we have a question way over here.
So, question about the
I take this seat. Andrew. No? Okay. All right. Yeah, come on.
Come on down, Andrew. Kent's got an appointment.
You can go to the bullpen again.
And you wonder, you plan things out, you have all these speakers, and you never know what's going to happen. Come on up, Andrew.
Are you okay, Andrew?
Yeah, okay.
Yay! Hi. Now let's get that question going. Now you have another new person to ask questions of too, as well.
Okay. So many people have the experience of working in committees where the ideas that are unusual often get rejected. But this flag has elements that have never been seen in many other flags. I'm curious, how did your committee overcome that tendency and actually come as something unique instead of what the usual committee produces?
Do you want to take that, Luis? Maybe?
I think going back to the calendar that we developed and what we needed to do, and every week we brought experts from NAVA and remember we're doing the flag and the seal, and both feed to each other, right? It helped us a lot understanding both things, and the idea of simplification was big. But not abstraction, but simplification with meaning. And it was this last week, the last semifinals, where I think we did. We had the opportunity to go from a B+ flag, as described by NAVA, to an A+ flag. And I really, that last week, when I came in as the commissioner, I came in as a designer. By the second week, I became a politician. So the whole time I was a politician. In the last week, I decided that I needed to drop the politician and become a designer again. And that's when I saw the simplification of the flag. And I saw, me personally, I remember seeing the Mississippi River and the star that guide us and so on. So, yeah, I mean, it came to that, to less is more sometimes.
Mike, did you want to say anything on that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess the two elements that maybe you might be referring to, I'm not even an amateur vexillologist, and as I said, I'm colorblind. But the two things that maybe might be unusual are the reverse chevron shape and the 8-pointed star. I think the way that those kind of rose to the top was they were tied directly to Minnesota. I mean, the reverse chevron shape is the shape of Minnesota, and I think when Andrew described it to us, that was what we decided to go for. And then I remember some discussions about that, saying, well, we should include the northwest angle on top, and we should include the Mississippi, like basically make it a map. But then I think we came back to that simplification idea. And then the 8-pointed star, most flags, as I understand, have 5-pointed stars, but the 8-pointed star was tied directly to our indigenous heritage. Scandinavian barn quilts in Minnesota often use that shape. And then right there in the floor of the rotunda of the state capitol, which you'll see tomorrow, is that exact same star design. So I think if those are more unusual elements for a flag, I think the fact that they directly kind of related to Minnesota and its history was kind of what put them over the top.
Well, before we go to more questions from the audience, I want to welcome Andrew Prekker, to the panel here, and double check that his microphone's working. Go ahead and test.
Hello? Is it working?
It's working fine. And if you don't mind, I'd like to give you a pretty simple question. What was your inspiration for the original design?
Sure. So the inspiration for my original design was based off of different significant symbolic elements to Minnesota, its history, its people, our culture. And there's kind of three main design elements that I really kind of gravitated towards immediately. And one was a North Star to represent our state motto, which is L'Étoile du Nord, which means the North Star in French. And I also immediately liked the idea of doing an abstract shape of the state of Minnesota, because I thought that would be a really unique design feature that not a lot of flags can do, is feature their territory shape in a way that's unique, but still timeless and subtle. It's not too on the nose in its interpretation. And then also the water emblem was very important to me for Minnesota. It's, as people have said, it's the land of 10,000 lakes. The Mississippi River begins in our state. And the name Minnesota itself comes from the Dakota phrase, Minnesota Makoche, which means a land where the waters reflect the sky. So overall, those were kind of the three elements that really kind of created the core concept of every variation of the design that I created.
Excellent. Now we have new blood on the panel here. So I'm expecting some more questions. Oh, a hand. I thought I saw it. Oh, right in the middle down here, Chris, right here. Oh, that one. And then we're going to, Dave wants you to get down here and that'll be next. He'll be the gentleman right in the middle, be next, right there. And then we'll go with that one right there.
Prekker, I'm curious about your personal feelings about the design that we ultimately ended up with from the changes from your personal design.
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually extremely happy with the final flag. When it came to working on, when it came, I worked a lot on trying to revise my original design, and the committee made it very clear that the 6 finalists were not finished flags. They were concepts to be improved upon for sure. And as an artist and a designer, it's very common to revise things and improve them. And I knew that even though I saw a lot of potential in my design, it was really more of just kind of a draft to base upon the final flag. And I think the choices the committee made were absolutely perfect. I truly love the final flag, and I think it is legitimately the best version of it that exists. I'm very happy with what they did.
And I think Dave's got a question right here.
What recommendations would you have for other states who may change their flag in the future?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
What recommendations would you have for other states who may want to change their
Recommendations for
flag?
other states in terms of the process? Mike, you want to start?
Sure. I've talked about it a bit, but I guess I would say, I feel like having a commission of representing diverse groups, both, demographically, but then also by area of expertise was very helpful. I thought having it be in a fairly compressed time actually worked pretty well for us. And I don't know, I could just imagine flag fatigue setting in if it went on for longer than that. I don't know if that's a thing or not, but then I feel like having it not go back to the legislature depoliticized it somewhat. Again, I won't say I'm not blind. I'm not going to say it depoliticized it completely, but I do feel like it just made it so that, okay, this is what we have. The timing worked out pretty well. I feel like the commission was required to be done by the end of the year. But then the flag itself didn't go into effect until May 11th, which is the day Minnesota became a state. It's statehood day in Minnesota. So, and that's also the time during which the legislature is in session. So if we really, if the commission had come up with something, that people didn't like and that there was pretty broad consensus about it, then the legislature could have acted and changed it, but it didn't. So then it just went into effect on May 11th. So there was kind of that fail safe in place, which I think gave it some legitimacy also. But I feel like those combinations I can't imagine they wouldn't work well in other states as well.
And Luis, any advice for other states?
Yeah, Mike, make sure that you have not just politicians, make sure you have some designers, experts, marketing experts, brand experts, and yeah, of course. I was getting there.
You didn't notice that was
I was just going by
Whitworth of the Minnesota Historical Society mentioning that the historians should also be included.
100%. And we brought up a couple of historians right away. That was the first. That's right. That was the
Dan,
first
you want to get
thing.
back on the panel?
We all needed to understand where the original flag that we have behind that came from and what it meant to start, like any other project, a visual project. So that was very important. But I think the amount of time was perfect. So I recommend no more than 4 months because everybody's busy, and more if you're a non-politician. That's not your game. And there was a lot of politics.
The shorter time was kind of a fluke of sorts. The starting point was delayed for a while at the beginning. So it was going to originally be a longer process. Is that correct?
Not immensely longer. I think the governor was supposed to appoint all of the commission members by August 1st. And then we would start working immediately. But some of the appointments didn't happen until September 1st. And I think our first meeting was maybe first or second week of September. So it was at most, it would have been a 5-month process, but it ended up being a little bit less than 4 months, I think.
But you're both saying that was advantageous.
I think it was.
I agree too. Yeah, and we had 2 projects. We had the seal and the flag, and still it did work. It did work very well. The other thing too, you want to have media on your side, and the reason you want to have media, you want media to tell the public that this is going to happen first, and then when is it going to happen, and then use media again to remind people to participate. And so being connected with the media was extremely important.
I want to get Andrew back into this discussion too. Andrew, do you think there's any advice for other states from the design viewpoint?
I would say, I think really centering the original designers and, including them with revision ideas and concepts. I think, as a designer myself, and I know that with the other finalists, we were very passionate about this project. One of the other finalists, he had already designed his flag like 12 years ago. So it's like, for a lot of us, we had a lot of passion and dedication for this. And I think being included in that was really exciting, and I was grateful for that. So just making sure the original designers have a, somewhat of a say in how the process goes, just a little bit for sure.
What about the amount of time to design?
I mean, I feel like it was relatively easy for me. I think 4 months was, well, I guess, yeah, it was probably a little shorter for me, but it was perfectly fine for me. I had plenty of time to go over revision ideas and work on stuff. So I think it was a good time period.
I have another question that was also submitted early too as well. And I think it's more for Mike and for Luis, but Andrew, you can definitely chime in as well. The difference between the seal and the flag in terms of pushback and in terms of process. And this person was more of a statement than a question, but I'm going to put it in the form of a question. Was there much more pushback on the flag change than there was on the seal change?
Yes.
That's the end of that question right there. Put a little detail.
Well, I mean, I think this was reflected both in the discussions at the commission and in the public view too. There was maybe 200 submissions on the seal and a little over 2,000 on the flag. And I mean, just generally, I think a flag is a much more noticeable emblem than a seal. People don't think about seals as much, even though the design previously was the same on both for the flag and the seal. The sense I got was that everyone generally felt, when we saw all the different seal proposals, the one that we ultimately chose was voted on by almost every commission member, and it was far and away the favorite. We then made some changes to it, which did generate some controversy, like the inclusion of the phrase Minnesota Makoche on it. Some people felt was advancing one culture over another, which I mean, personally, I don't think that's true. I mean, the name of the state is Minnesota, which is derived from that phrase, which is a Dakota phrase. So I thought it made sense for it to be on there. But even setting that aside, I think generally speaking, people were a lot cooler with the seal. It just kind of, that almost to an extent flew under the radar, I'd say, compared to the amount of attention that the flag generated.
Luis?
I think as a designer, or even as a kid who's in kindergarten with a white piece of paper and Crayolas, it's a lot easier to draw a flag than to draw a seal. And even professional or semi-professional or student designers who entered on the seal, I can tell right away that they didn't understand typography, lettering, spaces, the width of lines, and reproduction when you reduce it and when you do it big, and then how it works in black and white, and how it works in 2 colors and 4 colors, how it works in stone and plastic, all those different materials that a seal has to go through, and blind embossing and debossing. So it was very complex. But when we saw, I think it was 300 and something. I don't know why I remember that. When we saw that, I wanted to make sure that when we voted, we did it blindly. So we all had 6 stickers. Then we voted behind our favorite. And at the end, we turned the pages, and everyone, that was like absolute, everybody liked the winner for the seal. Because it was done by a professional designer, and it just nailed it. And that's what everybody wanted. And people wanted that, believe it or not, they wanted the seal to become the flag. Yeah, a lot of people. That was like, it's done. We're happy. Everybody was extremely happy with the seal.
Minnesotans are very consistent.
Yeah.
But Andrew, any comments on this idea of the seal versus the flag? Go ahead.
I think people were a little more eager to accept the seal. It's probably for the loon. People were really, Minnesotans in general, really wanted to see a loon or very kind of obvious symbols of Minnesota. Whereas the flag, it's more abstract. Unless you like read about what the symbols mean, it's a little hard to tell at first glance, how is it relevant to Minnesota? So I think the loon probably helped people buy them over on the seal a bit easier than the flag.
And then I think we have a question right from the audience. Here we go.
This actually brings to my question, which is a follow-up project for you. When I'm looking here at the stage, I think you need a loon finial to put on top of the flagpole. I think that would look awesome with the eagle, and you would certainly be one of the only states to have a custom finial. So that's your next year's project.
But is that okay, NAVA people? Can we do that?
I mean, Texas, you often see the Lone Star.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
But you would be one of the few states to have an official finial, I think. So
I like
that's
that.
my
I like
challenge
that.
for you.
I like that. I like that.
And that was beautiful, and it was a great statement. Do you have a question by any chance? When are we going to do it? I said, put it in the form of a question. Excellent. Excellent.
I can't draw, or I'd submit it. But yeah, once you make it, then I'll claim partial credit.
Oh, here we have another question over here.
Ignoring this situation of the have the legislation finished with the issue of the flag, Minnesota doesn't have any official state colors. Might it be able to adopt an official state color to join those states that do have an official state color?
We're going to have Mike take that one.
State color? Is that the question?
Yeah, state color.
I mean, we could certainly adopt one. I mean, there are bills introduced for state symbols. Every session there's usually something new. A couple of years ago, we designated a new state bumblebee as the rusty patch bumblebee. We're also one of the only states, I think, that has a state photograph. So it would just be up to an individual legislator to introduce a bill saying the state color of Minnesota is whatever color they think it is. As a colorblind person, I don't really care.
I knew that was coming.
So I'm not going to carry that bill, but if you want to write to a Minnesota legislator and encourage them to do it, go for it.
I think we're going to go over here because the questions are starting to come like snowballs. For those from not Minnesota, that means fast. So,
so on a more lighthearted note, I know the picture of the dog was brought up as one of the more lighthearted submissions. I regularly go to the Minnesota United soccer games, and someone did print off that picture of a dog and print it on a flag, and so you'll see it flying at games. But other ones came out too. Some of those more jokey, lighthearted ones, like the so-called menacing loon design that Flags for Good had published. And so my question to y'all is, was there any lighthearted design that you especially loved, even though it might not go anywhere? I personally love the Duck Tech Grey Duck.
I'm going to start with Andrew on that one because I'm sure Andrew looked at the competition. Go ahead, Andrew.
There was one flag that somebody submitted that I thought was hilarious. It was just a picture of their table, like the wood grain. and so I thought that was a very funny, lighthearted submission.
Luis?
Yeah, no, there was like literally a lot of loons with lasers. And I never put it together. And at one point, we had a whole conversation, and it got why can't we bring the loon into the flag? And then I had to do my research, and I brought a map of where loons are in the state of Minnesota, and half of the state is where the loons are, and the others half they're not. And that was the reason. It does not represent all of us. So there's people in the south of Minnesota, they have never seen or heard a loon. Yeah.
That's a tragedy.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I do remember there were two of the commission members of different political parties, but they were from southern Minnesota. Both felt like, no, we don't have loons in our part of the state. It doesn't represent the whole state. It is the state bird. It is the state symbol. It was designated by the legislature, but they felt it shouldn't be on the flag. In terms of the question, with the one lighthearted one I tend to think of is it was clip art, to use that term, just a picture of a purse or something, and it just had the letters BAYG on it, which I think is how some Minnesotans are heard pronouncing the word bag. So for whatever reason, I just couldn't get enough of that one. So if I were to fly one of the silly suggestions, I think it would be that one.
I think
here we go.
The dog one became very famous because it was the first one that went in national news, and I think it made it in CNN, and that just became
once it's on CNN, it's everywhere. Yeah. We have another question.
Yes, I have a question primarily for Mr. Fitch to begin with, at least. I saw that symmetry was one of your considerations. That's not something I hear a lot of in flag design, although I'm limited in that capacity. I'm not saying I'm universal to know the truth. I was wondering how much symmetry influenced your choice, and could you have foreseen a flag design, or would you have chosen a flag design that didn't have symmetry, was asymmetric?
Yes. At one point, there was question that what's supposed to be the state, it was too abstract. And I brought options where I moved the angle a little bit down to reflect the map of Minnesota a lot better, in theory, right? And that's not symmetrical. So I'm breaking my own rules that we established in the creative brief. But it was important more than anything for people to see choices and possibilities. Definitely that isometrical, it's more correspondence to the state of Minnesota, because the state of Minnesota is not symmetrical, it's isometrical. It was important at that level to show it to everyone, and we put it to vote, and we went back to symmetry.
I do remember too when we were talking about whether or not to have the stripes. Like there was some discussion about whether if it were hung vertically, like it might happen at a stadium, then it would not be symmetrical. And I think we looked at all of the different designs, both horizontally and vertically, and I think that was pretty compelling to a lot of the commission members as well.
I think we have another question right at the top there.
Could you show us the original design that he was talking about?
Oh, good.
We actually have a visual aid coming up.
Yeah, that's great.
Hey, Dave, could you come up and help hold up the other end of the flag? Hold up your end, Dave. Here it comes.
That's great.
And get a picture if you want. Actually, why don't we put it behind Andrew? Or Andrew, get over there. There we go. Everyone here, photo opportunity. Photo opportunity. Everyone get it? All right. Thank you. Thanks, Dave, for doing that. Before we go on with more questions from the audience, there was, again, another pre-submitted question that is more of a process question, but I think it's valid to ask, that you had 14 virtual meetings and 4 in-person meetings. That sound about right? More or less. And they wanted to know, did you get more done in person or virtually?
I think we needed to have the virtual ones. There was no reason to meet in person. And the ones that we met in person, we needed to have those in person. That was
perfect ratio then.
Yes, those were the times that we needed to look at the first 25, up to 25 flags and up to 25 seals that each of us voted for, that we brought them indoors. We had to see them in person, plus we needed to vote blindly.
So you think that was a good ratio?
100%. I think it was, yeah.
And then Mike?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I remember one of the in-person meetings was like 9 hours long or something. I think that was the one where we and it had bullet big bulletin boards with like, since every commission member was able to vote for up to 25 designs, it had, something like 250 flag designs and 60 seal designs up on it. So I think that was pretty important to see all of that in person.
And Andrew, you presented in person, right?
No, I did not
Oh, you
present
didn't?
in person. No.
Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so I wasn't able to make it, unfortunately. Would have loved to be there, but I actually pre-made a kind of a video detailing my design and kind of what I wanted it to achieve with the flag. And I also sent like a pre-written speech. So fortunately someone was able to present it for me, and the committee could like review the video and see all my information. So I was grateful that I could be a part of it and help show them what my vision was for it.
And now back to the audience. Oh, here we go.
This is not a question. This is a follow-up to Annie's loon finial. This is the 1918 National Geographic magazine that showed the Minnesota flag had a gopher finial. There is a gopher finial in Senator Tina Smith's office on the state flag pole in her office, an actual gopher finial.
Could have a rusty patch bumblebee finial too. I could see this being a big fight among legislators.
And that was Lee. So we're going to put up this flag for Lee right there. We're going to leave that up for Lee for a while.
Yeah.
Thanks for all your work, Lee, over the years. Oh, we got somebody right behind you, Dave. I like it when people sitting next to people who have questions and they're pointing at them. It's very rude.
I'm glad we brought this up, because I think for all of us in the room, when they announced that they were going to redesign the Minnesota flag, this one having 30 years of history, I guess if Duluth hadn't made their city flag similar to this, do you think this would have been considered, with the history that it already had?
That's an excellent question. And I think all three are going to answer that one.
Close to the finals. So yes.
It wasn't the exact one. It was one that was fairly close with the wavy line. And
yeah. I mean, it was very close. So the decision was that exactly. We didn't want it.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I have a lot of knowledge about that, but yeah, I think one of the final 6 designs was very similar to that 1989 version. So I was happy to see at least some sort of inspiration from that flag was somewhat in the final flags being considered.
Yeah, I call it the grandfather of the new one. So it's definitely.
Yeah, I was glad to see one at least similar to it. I was kind of surprised it didn't go further in the process. I mean, it's kind of just when I was carrying the bill, it kind of became the symbol that I used for it. Like there were lapel pins with that design on it that I gave out to all my legislative colleagues, and a bunch of, fortunately it was mostly one side of the aisle, but still a fair number of legislators were wearing the lapel pins as we were debating, with that design as we were debating it. I was a little surprised it didn't get further along because there was a lot of history behind it, a lot of work done on that design. I don't think the fact that Duluth had designed it necessarily foreclosed the idea. There wasn't really a lot of discussion on the commission members about that fact but yeah, I think it's also a great design, equally worthy. And I still have I bought one for my office. Actually, I have a full-size flag with that design on it that's still up in my office.
Since Burdett is still standing next to Lee, do you have any comments?
Yes. It was designed by Bill Becker, who's over here.
Where's he at? Stand up, let's go. Right back there. Anything else, Lee? Like the idea that it was the grandfather of designs or anything? Or?
No.
Next question. I think do we have one over on this side? I thought I saw one. Oh, actually, yeah. Why don't we do that and then we'll come down here? Dave, why don't you come over this way, and Burdett, you go over that way, and we will all set up all the way down and over here, Dave.
Several people on the panel seem to allude to the legal status of the old flag. Old flag still having some sort of legal status continuing legal status instead of just merely being retired. What's the nature of that status?
I think Mike's going to take that.
Yeah, I can't remember if the bill language actually specifies it, but I know, I mean, the historic, Kent maybe can speak to it too. It's just treated as the historic flag of Minnesota, and there's, I think when it is displayed, there's commentary for it. Do you have any?
We just use the term retired. And so, we certainly acknowledge the period of time that it did serve as the official flag. And as I said, we felt like it was important to preserve it in perpetuity as part of kind of Minnesota's flag journey, if you will. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know that it's specified in law specifically, but I think there are just general practices for treating historic flag, for how you treat historic flags.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Kent. Burdette, did you have that? Or no, it's Dave. Dave, go ahead. Here we go. Another question.
Hi, my name's Louis. I'm with the Star Tribune. I wanted to ask, I know, Luis, you already mentioned about the timeline, the 4 months, and I guess just for both you, but also Representative Frieberg, do you feel like, looking back, do you wish you had more time, or what do you think about those 4 months in terms of, did you feel rushed at all, or are you pretty satisfied with that amount of time?
We'll start with Luis on that.
I have worse projects, let me put it that way, at the office. But then I have a team that we focus just on that. In this case, I felt like I had 13 clients plus the whole state. And I was trying to guide to make a good decision. I wish there was more participation from rural areas. And I think the news didn't get there necessarily. I don't know if because of the lack of radio or print or what it was, but and then there's less population in rural too. But other than that, I think we did get a lot of from all the points in all the counties in rural Minnesota. There was participation. If there's one big complaint for me, it will be probably that. Obviously, there was more news and everybody was more aware here in the Twin Cities and the cycle news too, how it goes. And so it's yeah. And I don't know if it's more time would have helped. Probably more budget to focus on the advertisement or more PR from our end, or more accessibility from our end, to make sure that print, radio, and the internet and digital was aware on rural Minnesota.
Mike, did you want to?
Yeah, I don't know that I totally agree. I mean, I didn't look at the origin of all of the flag submissions and see where they were in Minnesota. But I mean, obviously, the flag that we ultimately picked was by somebody from Luverne, which is definitely in greater Minnesota. So I didn't necessarily feel like rural Minnesota was excluded. I know when the finalist flags got printed, they went both to the Mall of America and then also to Becker County. So they made it out to greater Minnesota. In terms of the question, I mean, I don't know that I would say I felt rushed as part of the process. It definitely felt like it was moving quickly, but it didn't necessarily feel like we were skipping over anything important or anything. And honestly, I feel like we did everything that we should have done, and I feel like we did it very well. And I don't know that having had more time would have necessarily added anything to the process that we didn't do.
Yeah, and I go back because we established in the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we signed off, all of us, that creative brief and then the calendar talked about, and that was very helpful.
Here we go. So first of all, I want to welcome Aaron. Thank you for coming. 3-hour delay on his train, but he's here. So give him a round of applause. And we're going to switch out. That chair is the hot seat. We just keep changing that chair over and over and over again. But hey, it makes things interesting, right? So welcome, Aaron. Come on down.
Good, Aaron.
And I think we're going to start with your travels. And if you just want to mention how you got here today, or almost didn't get here today. And while you're doing that, we'll have a couple other questions lined up for everybody else. But definitely start thinking about questions for Aaron, please, because he's also on the commission. In fact, I think he's actually ran from the station. You can see he's still breathing heavily. I believe I can actually read his bio, and that will give him time to catch his breath. Let me see if I can find it. So Aaron is a member of the Red Lake Nation and lives in Becker County. He served as a commissioner, of course, on the State Emblems Redesign Commission. He is a former legislative aide with the Minnesota House to both political parties. He is also both a former political party leader and mayor. He has worked to improve the quality of life for those living in rural and tribal communities throughout greater Minnesota. We were just talking about greater Minnesota as you walked up, serving on various state boards concerning policy and oversight of human services and healthcare. Let's welcome Aaron to the panel, please. And let's test his mic to make sure it works.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm a little late. Someone drove into an Amtrak train last night. This is the first time in 30 years, because I took Amtrak when I was a kid, and now that I have a medical disability where I can't drive. So I commute. I get a commuter rate from Amtrak from Detroit Lakes to St. Paul. When I come down for meetings for Medicaid, Minnesota Care, Human Services Performance, or other boards and advisory groups that I serve on for the state, representing rural residents and then representing Red Lake Nation, but also there are a few that I represent all of the tribes in Minnesota. I'm half German, my father's side, and I'm half Ojibwe on my mother's side. Her family's from Red Lake. My dad's family settled in Garfield when they migrated over from Germany in the 1840s.
Since you didn't get an intro on all that, we did talk a little bit about the North Star flag, one of the slides you had selected for today, and you had selected a different slide as well. So I'm going to put those up, either one that you would like to discuss. So let me get to the North Star flag. And did you want to say anything about that, or do you want to see the other flag? Sure.
Well, I thought it was important to give some recognition to the North Star flag. I try to be a little bit of a history nut. I really love the way that Minnesota's legislature compared to other state legislatures, even Congress, collects history and documents things, and has a reference library. And to know the history of the movement for the flag, it didn't happen it finally did happen with the trifecta. It may have, but in previous years, there were bipartisan proposals for a number of decades, going back to the 50s, to the 80s. When I worked in the legislature, when I interned before that in high school, it came up. It was really interesting, the people that were passionate about it, and the point that they drove for it. And it really did make sense to me then, that why do we have all these flags that look alike, that have very intricate symbols that no one could possibly read from a distance? That's not a flag. I think in other countries, I don't know for the scholars, but in other countries, you talk about the standards that people have, like in the Commonwealth countries or Great Britain, they'll have the monarch standard. Now that it's more intricate, that's not the people's flag. The people's flag is the Union Jack, and it combines those countries. Or in Canada, is the maple leaf. But we don't have that. We don't have, in the US, we don't have a separation of a head of state and a head of government, although maybe we should.
Did you want to comment on the other flag at all, or just want to put that up?
Well, yeah, when we started there was a little bit of discussion about commissioning. I heard about examples from cities and states talking about it. I don't believe any state did it, but where they would commission artists or designers to come up with, and then they would choose from those that they actually paid for, and then they would select them. And that tied into the discussion of, should it be art or should it be a symbol of a collective people? And there's a balance, I think, there. I picked this one, the loon flag, the blue one. I think this was a perfect example of an art. One of those, we had had it and we had commissioned artists to do that. This would be, we only commissioned a few artists to design some flags and then select them. This possibly could be the winner, or the orange one instead of the blue. But that's really difficult. That isn't the process that we use. It's probably wasn't going to turn out like Colorado's or Arizona's. But I just like to point out those differences.
We can go back to the audience. We were in the middle of a Q&A before you came in. And, we got one at the top of the stairs again. Here we go.
Could you take us through the symbols on the retired flag that you've described were troublesome? Not you, sir, but I mean the panel, the legislature said
Mike,
some of the symbols
one?
were troublesome. So what were the troublesome symbols on the retired flag?
This is kind of the problem with that's kind of the problem with the flag itself is, I don't know, it's just so intricate. It's a state seal. It's not a state flag really, but the main thing, I'm not the best person to be talking about it. There was one of the chair people of one of the tribes in Minnesota testified during the committee about how it made him feel. But if you can see that there's a white farmer in the bottom of the inner circle plowing the land. He has a gun on the stump to the left, and then there's an indigenous person on a horseback riding a horse, presumably out of the picture. And the design was basically, it was the recommendation of the governor in the 19th century, and it was designed by a guy named Seth Eastman. At one point, the legislature, I think in the initial version of the seal, the indigenous person was riding towards the sunset. And then at some point, the legislature changed the direction of the rider, which I don't think was quite enough of a change. But again, so that's kind of the image that many people see or the problems that many people see with the imagery, kind of in short. And I read the bit from the poem also before you were here. But then there's also just the issue of it not being a great flag design.
Aaron, do you want to follow up on that?
And I try to balance between, because of course, coming from a split household, or even from two different communities, sometimes it's hard to have a foot in both and find some balance. But realistically, it's just too busy unless you get up really close and look at it. Even from here, how many of you can see the lady slippers and know that they're actually lady slippers, the state flower? And no offense to the person who drew it, but the figures, they look like they're coloring books from when I was a kid. And I thought that when I visited the Capitol when I was young too, I was just like, this is ugly. It really is ugly. But for, the other reason is that the meaning behind this flag and the seal, the governor stated at the time when he approved it without legislative approval, which didn't come until 3 decades later. retroactively. He stated that it honors manifest destiny, which is one of the most horrendous genocidal times in American history. Yes, there was progress for people, but a great many people died and were slaughtered and removed. And that's nothing to celebrate. It's nothing to celebrate on a flag. And then going to the purposes, a flag, again, is supposed to be collective of showing the people as a collective. So this flag represents Minnesotans, the best that we could work out, and we compromised, like Minnesota does, for the most part. The seal, the Great Seal, and that was where I was more of a nerd, if you read things, is that is a symbol of the authority of government. It is not something for everyone. It's for official documents. It's to make a statement about the power of the government, even though it's our government, but that is the symbol for state government.
Luis, did you have any comments about the old flag?
Just to add, yes, from far away, it's unrecognizable. But even if you get really close, the images are very distorted. They look like they're melted. I did as a fine artist, not as a brand designer. I did a personal project, and it was called Deconstructing the Minnesota Flag. And so I wanted, just like in design principles, take something that is so busy and start taking elements piece by piece. So I did it, I believe, in 9 different flags, and I ordered the 9 different flags. But before we did it, I was looking for the original art, digital art. There's no such thing for digital art, because I wanted to delete the pieces. The only thing I was able to find was JPEGs in the internet. And if anybody knows what a JPEG is, it's just an image. You can move things around. So my designers at the office, we needed to find the closest to what the government of Minnesota was using. Because if you ask different flag manufacturers, they're even different. I don't know if you noticed that. And it just hit us that we should be to the closest. So once we found the highest quality that the government was looking, we redraw everything. And so we do have one that looks decent. if anybody needs it. And what we did was remove the elements as a study of what was hurting people. And you can Google Luis Fitch art and you will see that process of how it looks. But it was more as an exercise of from a social commentary more than anything else. But yes, to the point of even if you get closer, the art was like a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. That's why it looks like that.
Rewinding just a little bit, Aaron, because of the train issue, you missed a number of questions that were posed to all the panelists. And one was just the simple question that, how did you get appointed and how did you feel when you got selected? What were your first kind of thoughts when you got picked to be on the State Emblems Redesign Commission?
Well, I got appointed just by happenstance being in a queue. And originally I was appointed to serve both the Ojibwe and the Dakota communities, even though there were 2 seats. And I had to go back and explain that to MIAC, because some of the committees I serve on, I'm appointed by MIAC. Other ones I'm appointed by the governor or appointed by the commissioners. But just up in the queue, I know that there's because of how I look, I know that there's been a number of times over history where I've gotten selected basically because I don't look native by my friends and family in the Native community, because they feel that I go in, I might have more leverage, or I might be able to be more blunt in advocating for them, where it won't reflect. It's kind of a distance thing too. It's sometimes it can be very stressful.
How did you feel when you were selected then?
I thought it was great. I thought it was, I remember our first meeting. There were, I can't remember if it was NPR, Pioneer Press reported it, but there were a lot of people at, well, maybe we can ask for an extension of time. Maybe we can ask. And I was like, no, they've given us a timeline. And, we're not here to decide whether or not we change the flag. That wasn't the legislation. That was not what was passed. We were there to do the work. And we were also there to adopt it. And I did write a story, if you want to look at DL online, but just an insider's look to the commission from my point of view, that it felt sometimes that not Representative Frieberg or actually the legislators that were serving with the commission, but other legislators, that they didn't really want us to get it done. They thought it would be a mess. We didn't get any real funding compared to other states. Utah, it was $500,000. Massachusetts, it's almost over $2.5 million now. I looked yesterday, and they've been going for longer than a year. Some people bring up Mississippi, that they had a referendum on theirs and people got to choose, negating the fact that we're not an initiative referendum state like California or Florida. We believe in representative democracy. We elect elected officials. If they do something we don't like, we toss them out. That's
before you actually arrived, the panel was talking about the 4-month period being more than enough time and actually recommending a shorter time than a longer time. Do you agree with that? The
only thing that I would disagree with that is that for me, sometimes I get bogged down on the technical weeds, and sometimes I can butt heads with people over process, not aspirational stuff. Is that there really needs to be kind of more firmer, adopting rules, and sort of really sticking to that. And also, I don't know how other people feel, but I have some. I'm neurodivergent, and I cannot track people on Zoom calls. I can't do MS Teams with 30 people from the health department doing COVID every other week when we were doing COVID community tours. It just doesn't work for the most part. If you have to do it, try your best. But there's something about the human element. And I think that was lost sometimes, it felt like.
It was mentioned earlier that those in-person meetings were critical. And Louis said for those specific tasks, you had to meet. You agree with that then?
Yeah. And I remember when I was working full-time, there is a state law that allows, if you're appointed or even to an advisory committee, that you are allowed time off from work. And they have to allow you time to either, make up that time for pay or pay you the time that you were gone. A lot of people don't know about that public service right that we have. And so it was a little bit different because I felt sometimes people thought, well, you have a lot of time because you're ill most of the time. But sometimes I felt like back to the days of, okay, well, if you're going to be on this, you need to be here. You need to take the time off or step aside and let somebody else take your spot. It's to have more of those in-person meetings.
And we were talking about the ratio earlier and that it was necessary sometimes to do virtual. But let's go back to the audience for more questions because, we're going right to everyone's pointing at one person. Very exciting. And the microphone people are converging on that one individual. There you go.
I have a question regarding the acceptance of the flag through time. I'm Canadian. I say that gently, and like some branding. I can tell you right now, well, no, I can't tell you. I will express an opinion that if we were to change our flag today, there'd be a bigger revolt than 1966. That's my opinion. I don't know if others will agree. But my question is, do you have any plans to maybe take surveys every year or two to see if the new Minnesota flag is more liked through time?
I just had a former constituent and neighbor and nurse messaged me the night before last, and I thought it was just the strangest message through my Facebook profile. And she's like, with all this time you're spending on the state flag, because I was talking about this conference, she's like, you should mention how we didn't get a say in it and how, most people don't like it. And you guys should not adopt it. Now, this is a very intelligent person. But I had to say, it's already been adopted. It was adopted last January. And the year prior to us even, doing that, it was passed by the legislature. So, I can't help you. It wasn't it's not that it wasn't mine. I was glad to do it, but the legislature did it. It's something that people had wanted to have done, not for just the imagery, just there were people over the years that wanted to have a nice flag, a very clean flag that was cohesive.
And Mike, did you want to follow up on that, Mike?
I don't see the state funding like opinion surveys, just considering the other things that the state needs to fund on. I wouldn't, I know there was at least one of our local news organizations put out a poll a few months ago about acceptance of it. It wouldn't surprise me if some of the local media were to do that going forward. I mean, and just speaking for myself, I'm in kind of campaign mode right now. I'm running for re-election, and so I'm out at the doors a lot. And just at least in my pretty blue district, I've seen, maybe 20, 25 houses that have the new flag out. I don't know that I ever really saw any before. I've seen maybe 3 houses that have the old flag out, and I assume that's more as a kind of a political statement. I don't think I saw that. I don't think those houses had the old flag up before. I'm guessing maybe they put it up after this debate. But again, my the district I represent is fairly blue, and I've done some door knocking for my colleagues in swing districts. It's maybe more of a mix. If you're out in the rural areas, I suspect you might see more, at least at this point, at this stage in the process, you might see more of the old flag, but you probably see some new ones too. So, I mean, it's definitely getting out there. And I'm guessing, that's maybe kind of anecdotal, although I do door knock a lot. So maybe it's getting close to something approaching statistical significance, but,
Luis wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, very, very quickly. Since I started as with this project or involved with this, I would say that I received close to 30 between phone calls, social media, or emails or letters with people not being happy. And I would say that half of them were very polite. And they were saying their opinion, that they were not happy not with the process, but the result, basically. And there was no need for it. And they will say why, there was no need. I'm very specific. I will say that 5 were kind of strange and weird. It's not even worth it. But the reality, I received more than 80 postcards and letters saying that they loved it and thank you for your time and they appreciate it.
Aaron,
So
did
if
you want
that says anything, and they came from all over Minnesota, not just from the Twin Cities.
Aaron, did you want to?
Yeah, I really took, there were a lot of, being out rural Minnesota, and I try to keep in touch with county commissioners. And I actually really have to hand it to county recorders in greater Minnesota and county sheriffs. The Sheriff's Association and the Minnesota Association of County Officials was very helpful with the putting factual information out there, because there were people in certain counties saying this will cost us $80,000 to change everything over, even my own county, Becker County, it was really embarrassing because they're like, well, we're not going to fly the new state flag. We're not going to pay for that. And the sheriff had to respond, we don't fly the flag. We only fly the U.S. flag. We have an old 1920s Art Deco courthouse. It's very beautiful. It only has one flagpole. It doesn't even have the Palmilla flag on it. It just has a large American flag. It's never had anything else on it. It's never been any other. So there are 5 county commissioners sitting talking about money that they're spending that they're not spending. And there was no, unlike the seal for official uses, we talking with the sheriffs and the Grant County Sheriff, the District 3 sheriffs were really great because we got together and they wanted to do a lot of the changes just right away for uniformity. But I said, cost effective. Many people probably don't know this, but law enforcement, they lease their vehicles and they get rewrapped. So the wrapping changes. So if you're using the state flag, or let's say the troopers are using the state seal, that can be easily changed as you rotate out the cars. I mean, there's no additional cost to do that. So, and they were very helpful with putting that out. And then when the recorders were also very helpful with the Secretary of State's office, is that the Great Seal of the state of Minnesota, its official use is relegated only to the Secretary of the State, apostilles, notaries, and county recorders. It's because county recorders perform 2 duties when they record deeds and titles on behalf of the state and on behalf of the county. No one else is authorized to use the official Great Seal. Now, there are certain state legislators can use it on a podium, they use it on their card. That's been allowed just for ceremonial for years, but for a county commissioner or a county to be using the state seal in some official manner, they're not supposed to be doing that.
So we're going to move on to closing observations now. I think this is one of the most enjoyable panels I've been at for a long time. Not only do we have wonderful people up here, but we've had wonderful people exchanging through the middle seat over and over and over. And to have Lee here as well, and Ted, and all these wonderful flag luminaries. It's been a wonderful time, and I thank you for coming. But we're going to go in kind of reverse order. We'll start with Mike, and then to Aaron, and then finally with Luis. Make the chair wait till the end. Just any observations they would like to share with you before we conclude today.
I didn't really prepare any closing remarks, and I feel like we've covered this very thoroughly. I guess I would just say, I didn't totally know what I was getting into when I did this. I had no idea there's this community of exilologists out there. There's organizations for it that everybody has an opinion about what should be on a state flag, regardless of whether or not they consider themselves an exilologist. But it was really rewarding, and it was really a fun process to be a part of. I know there was a question earlier about, keeping the media interested in this. And my sense was just like, I don't know that it takes that much effort. I mean, it seemed like something, as we went through the discussions, it seemed like something that the media was just fascinated with, and got more attention than anything I've ever worked on. And glad you're here today, covering even this a few months later. So, it's just, if you're from a different state and want to, and you're one of those 19 other states that just have the seal on a bed sheet, I do think you could probably learn something from the process we followed in Minnesota. I think it worked well, and I think we ended up with a great result.
Aaron?
Yeah, I thought it was a good result. I really like the happiest part of it for me was to see that the star that I wanted used was used and even dialed. There's a lot of symbolism in the 8-point star, just to dispel any rumors you might read in children's books. They are not M's on the rotunda. Cass Gilbert did not design M's. The 8-point star was used in symbolism long before the Latin alphabet, and it means many different things to many different people, especially tribes to the west of the Mississippi. Lakota and Dakota, I know that there were some people saying that it was used for quilting. Quite possible. I believe that they're thinking of the Celebris. That's much different. That's a Norwegian heraldry symbol. It's a broken star, but they use it as a dial for moon adjustments. They would do rocks. Babylonia would use it actually before the Star of David and before the crescent moon. Islam and Judaism would use the 8-point star as what they called the seal of Solomon or the seal of the prophets. They use the same symbol. It's used in Estonia, Latvia, Slavic peoples for protection instead of using a crucifix. It goes back.
So we can go on to Luis for final comments.
For me, it was a great experience. I would do it all over again. I'm glad that NAVA exists. I was aware a little bit about it, but I think bringing you guys as consultants just reinforce it, not just for us internally, but for the public. And it was very educational. So kudos to you guys because it was very, very, very helpful for us to land to where we land with the flag. And it was a great experience. And like I said, I will do it all over again.
And special thanks to everyone who came here today and all our switch hitters too. Andrew Prekker for being here today. I think we should give him a little bit of applause for all his work. And in case you forgot, the Minnesota Secretary of State, Steve Simon, was here. A little applause for him, please. And don't forget, our favorite historian was up here too earlier. Kent Whitworth, thank you. And of course, Louis Fitch, Aaron Wittnebel, and a lot of people say Frieberg, but it's Frieberg. That's right, Mike Frieberg, representative from 43B. And also, there's a couple other people that need to be acknowledged here. But just one in particular that I think a lot of you watched some of the virtual meetings of the group. How many of you watched any of the virtual meetings? A lot of you did. David Kelleher, who's right over here, was a critical part from the Minnesota Historical Society. I think we should give him a round of applause as well. And we're going to have a reception in just a few minutes, right across, go out this door and to the rotunda there. And the reception will start at 5:15. So you have 15 minutes to do whatever you want to do. Thanks for coming.